everyone, once again. Very good to see you. Do we have any questions or thoughts from last time, since you got to go home, think about it, meditate on it, pray about it, see how the Spirit moved you? I already talked to Jamie, so don't. Yeah. That's what's making me ask about it, just in case anybody else had. In particular, about the Jesus wept section. Going once, going twice.
What? Is there a question?
Huh?
Did you just ask a question?
Yeah, if anybody else had a question.
You're deaf, Dad.
I know.
Right?
Which, speaking of that, I still have congestion and my ears are clogged, so if anybody's going to make comment, you have
Really?
to speak up.
Rachel.
All right, seeing no other thoughts, extra thoughts, then we'll move on
Um,
to 30th. Yes.
could we go back to the groaned?
Yep.
It just, I just heard another commentator was saying that most people believe that it's deeply angered, but then he said it's, I can't remember how he put it, like deeply emotional or deeply, there's another way of looking at it. And so, because he was wondering why Jesus would be angry. And so I was wondering if you could help explain that a little further.
Yeah, we mentioned last time that it has to deal with the deep agitation, and could even be translated as indignation as to what he's feeling here. And that it's it was also the idea of a boiling over, like how you would boil water and just gets hotter and hotter, then finally just reaches the point where it spills out. But even though that's the terminology that's used, that doesn't happen. So Jesus is feeling these things, but he's not allowing his emotions to actually overrun him. Now, as far as to the reason why, that's what we discussed last week as a possibility of looking at the situation and then attaching it to other situations. So I'll just ask you guys, what other events did we attach to this situation where we read about Jesus weeping? This isn't the only place where we have it being said that Jesus wept.
I remember Gethsemane was mentioned.
Okay, that's Hebrews 11, I believe it is, where it talks about him being in the garden and he's praying, and it says that he wept. Oh, he was talking to your mom out there. I didn't realize that's who, oh, and Maddie, I didn't realize that's who he was talking to. I thought he was just randomly shouting. Okay, so you have Jesus, and it being said that he wept in the garden, but there was another one.
But also wept for the people because Jerusalem is going to be destroyed.
Okay, so Christina said Luke 19, huh? 41, that as he is looking over the city of Jerusalem, it says that he wept over the city, or he wept for the city. Okay, in those circumstances where you have him weeping in that event, what's he weeping about?
About the loss of the people, the sin that they're in, that they're not looking to repent over, and he knows that they're going to be destroyed.
Okay, so in weeping over the city, it's because of sin. They're not repenting, and thus they're going to face judgment for that. Weeping in the garden. Why is he in that situation? Why is he in the garden, praying, alone? What's he about to face?
The world.
All right, crucifixion. And he's going to die. He has to be crucified because of sin. Now we have, in this situation again, it being stated that Jesus wept. Well, okay, Lazarus is dead, but as we mentioned, why has he died?
Because of sin.
Because of sin. The consequence of sin is death. And so this emotion that he's feeling is because of what we have to go through. So there's God in the midst of this with us, and we have being presented for us how God feels when people have to face death. And because of the fact of sin. So it continues to build upon itself as to how bad sin actually is, and how we should feel about sin, and the fact that this is the consequence that we have because of it. So as far as I read in some commentators that they are looking at Mary and Martha and the statements that they're making, and that being a possibility of his indignation because of their lack of faith. I can see that as a possibility. I just don't see it as a very strong one, based upon the other accounts where we have Jesus doing that exact same thing. Okay, anything else? All right, then verse 36 rather. The people see Jesus weep. Then said the Jews, behold, how he loved him. And some of them said, could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused that even this man should not have died? Now again, we have similar wording as to what Mary and Martha have already stated. Well, Lord, if you had been here, our brother wouldn't have died. And we looked at that and we said, okay, I'm not going to judge that too harshly. I'm not going to view that as a criticism on their part as directed at Jesus, but instead as it being a statement of their trust and their reality of who he is and what he's able to do. That statement within itself shows a great deal of confidence in what Jesus is able to do, was able to do. And then Martha even going a step further and saying, I know even now, if you were to ask, that God would hear you. And even in this situation with this Jewish crowd and them making the statement, some of them said, could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused that even this man should not have died? I don't know that I can be too harsh about this crowd either. Because if we are considering the position that they are all in, everyone is still waiting to figure out and to find out, is this really the one we're supposed to be waiting for? John struggled with it when he was in prison. And how did Jesus respond to John?
Tell them of the things you see.
All right, but was it out of anger?
Yes.
No. Was it out of frustration? Did he try to guilt John? No. This is understandable. And it's just, all right, you go back and you tell them what everybody's seen. Now, even in this situation, here are the people, and even with what they're stating, that within itself should be an admission of, or should be an answer to the question. Obviously, if he opened the man's eyes back in chapter 9, then what about this situation of saving Lazarus before he died?
Could have done it.
Absolutely. Yes. Could have. But they're watching all of this so as to find out. There are people that are still trying to feel out what is really going to happen. And they've not made any decisions until certain points of evidence. And that we're going to find at the end of this, or not the end of this chapter, but here in just in a couple of verses, that because of this, there are going to be many people that believed on him. So again, it's just it's a Thomas situation. Well, I'm not going to believe it until I see the prints in his hands and I can thrust my hand into his side. Fine. Just asking for evidence. But as we're looking at this and we're considering this situation, we have once again being evidence for us a truth that everyone is needing to get a grasp on. Now you just look at this crowd here. Here are these Jews, and they've come to comfort the family. And then the statement in verse 37 on how it is that if he had been there, have caused that even this man should not have died. This shows to all the world that they are not able to do anything when it comes time to face death. Here we are trying to comfort everybody, but you know what? If he had been here, he could have stopped this. And it's the realization that there was not one thing that they could do at this time. And that we need someone that can deal with death. And that's what Jesus will show to them and to us in this situation. That he does have the power over death. He's the only one that can remedy this problem. But even as we're talking about this, death isn't the problem. That's the symptom. The root, the cause of that problem, as we've been talking about, is sin. And that's what he's come to get at the heart at. And then verse 38. Jesus, therefore, again, groaning in himself. Same word as we had before. These emotions being stirred in him. His humanity. At this time, and he says to them, and himself coming to the grave, it was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Now, this is not the last time that we're going to read about a cave as a grave. And we're even going to see some contrasts to Jesus raising Lazarus to how Jesus is going to be raised. So verse 38, or verse 39 rather, Jesus said, so here we are at the grave, take ye away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, saith unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days. Jesus saith unto her, said I not unto thee, that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me, and I knew that thou hearest me always. But because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. Now, this is the second longest prayer that we have recorded of Jesus. The longest one is going to be in John 17. Now, that's what we have recorded. But here is a point that we've touched on little by little as we've gone through this, but we want to spend some time on it here now that we're actually in the section. Here's Martha. The one just a little short while ago was saying, okay, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died, but I know that even now, whatever you ask, God is going to hear you. And that whole conversation about, well, do you believe that he will be raised again? Well, now it comes time for that to actually be done. And who's starting to waver? It's Martha. Now again, I'm not trying to be overly critical or too harsh in the situation, but it's a point of application. And we've seen it time and time again as we've gone through Matthew and now John. Faith can talk a good game. And oftentimes we might hear people say about themselves in these types of situations, oh, well, if I were there and this were me in this situation, I would have done X, Y, and Z. I wouldn't be so sure. And you have people that have that mentality. I mean, just take, for example, Moses leading the people across the Red Sea. Oh, if I were there, I would have been one of the first ones to go across. By the very fact of you making that statement, more than likely you would have been one of the ones complaining. When it's time to put that faith to the test and to put faith into action, then all of a sudden people want to start getting squeamish. and they want to start falling back from what they said earlier. But as we're considering this, this is okay, that's fine, but you need to recognize that that's happening. And that you're needing to use this as an opportunity of growth. Okay, I've said some things, now am I going to follow through with those things that I've said? Yes, ma'am.
I would just point out that Thomas just was saying, let us go with them, let us go die. And where was he on the day of the crucifixion?
That's right. Yep. When it comes time for Jesus to be arrested,
Doubting Thomas.
everybody wants to scatter. Now, as we're considering this point of application, we have a brotherhood that is just like this. And that we will come together and we'll hear stirring sermons about how that we need to stand fast. We need to be courageous. We need to be strong as soldiers for Christ. 2 Timothy 2, 3 through 4. And then you'll have some brethren, they'll get so stirred by that kind of information, and they'll say, okay, let's go fight. Let's go do something. And then either the very one that gave the sermon or the ones that are in leadership will then stand up and say, no, we can't do that. Well, then which is it? Are we actually soldiers that are supposed to go out and be involved in a spiritual warfare? I mean, the author that wrote that to Timothy is the same one that wrote in the 2 Corinthian letter about the weapons of our warfare. He's the same author that wrote to the Ephesians on how we're supposed to put on the whole armor of God. Well, okay, it sounds like we're supposed to get out there and do something. To go to battle and cross swords. Well, yeah, we'll talk about those things, but we won't actually do it. Well, there's a problem in your faith. And even as we have Jesus stating here, what he says to Mary, Martha, Jesus saith unto her, said I unto thee, that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God. We just talked about this. Now trust in what I said. Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. Jesus lifted up his eyes, and now we have given to us an example of how our faith is needing to be. Lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me, and I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. He's saying these things out loud for their benefit. So they could hear beyond the shadow of a doubt, know what he has to say, know what he is saying and what he's asking and what he's requesting. And there's no room for doubt. Now, just look at how Jesus is making this request before God. Is he wavering here? Is there any doubt? Is there any question as to what he's asking? No. He is in full assurance in going before God, going before the Father, making this request, and that God is going to hear him. And we have other passages showing to us that that's how we're supposed to be. James 4:3. Ye ask and receive not. Why? Because you ask amiss. You're not asking correctly. And that you may consume it upon your lusts. And then we have John, who's recording this gospel account. He wrote some epistles. And in his epistles, he writes, 1 John 3:22, and whatsoever we ask, we receive of him because we keep his commandments and do those things that are pleasing in his sight. We ought to have the same confidence as we ask for God to help us out or to give us things as Jesus did. And it's based upon some conditions. Jesus lived his life in service of and doing the will of the Father. All right, that's the condition, because we keep his commandments. And thus we have John recording for us, you do this, you receive this. Then 1 John 5:14-15, and this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, now that's the kicker. That's the condition. He heareth us. Jesus knew what the will of the Father was. Now for us, it's a situation we don't always know what the will of God is. And so we have to ask, as it's laid out in other passages of Scripture, according to thy will. If it be thy will, then we'll have this, or we'll have that, or we'll do this, or we'll go there. And if we know that he hear us whatsoever we ask, we know that we have the petitions that we desired of him. Now, everything that's going on in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is all designed to get us to this level. And that as we're reading about Mary, Martha, and this crowd, and we're hearing the things that they're saying, they are living these events out in real time.
I think he also wants people to see that he has a relationship with the Father, and also to acknowledge that it's God's work that he does.
Right, absolutely. And that he's not doing this on his own accord, like what the devil was trying to tempt him with in Matthew chapter 4. Well, make these stones into bread. That wasn't something that God had specified for him to do. Throw yourself off the pinnacle of the temple. Okay, again, that's not something that God had specified for him to do. And then certainly bowing down and worshiping the devil is nowhere close to what God willed for him to do. So absolutely, it's a situation of, once again, this is not, as we said, this is not Jesus allowing his emotion to run over him, to control him, and in doing something that would not be in accordance with the will of the Father. What you got, Jamie?
I was just thinking, when you're talking like that, and just the importance of self-control over your own emotions. As a very emotional person, that's been something that's been really hard for me. But I see the benefit in, my many discussions with Reese. Now, let's not get emotional about this, Mom. Let's think about this. And it's true. Look what happens. You are doing God's will. It's easy. You put aside yourself. That's what it is. You focus on God.
Well, if I can tweak that just a little bit. Is there anything wrong with getting emotional?
No.
No. Jesus is getting emotional. He's showing his emotion. But he's not letting his emotion run over him.
Well, that's the thing. When his words are saying it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. That's why he's there.
Yeah.
He's there to show them, to help them one last time. I mean, it's getting close. We have, a month away?
Right.
And it's still, from him dying.
Oh yeah, not in the class, but
Yeah. But that's my point, it just doesn't leave his mind, because that's what he's there, is
Right.
to accomplish the Father's will.
Right. And so I just wanted to tweak that just a little bit, because oftentimes in conversation and we get emotional, we want to apologize. There's no reason to apologize for feeling something that you're feeling. God made us with those emotions, and He gave us them for a reason. And so even with this situation, the emotion is a good thing, for allowing the people to see it and for them to be able to witness, well, okay, here's this man claiming to be God, but then he's weeping. Who would have thought a strong, powerful, mighty God would weep? But that's the beauty of His humanity. And that we get to see that. God is now feeling what it is that we feel. And that's how Christ is able to be a mediator between us and the Father. So, yeah, good point. Yes?
To add on top of that, to clarify what I said, was stay in control of your emotions. Don't let your emotions control you.
Yeah.
That's to clarify.
And that's the difficult part. That's the struggle. So then you tack these scriptures along with Matthew 17, 19, 20. When the disciples were not able to heal the man's son, then came the disciples to Jesus apart and said, "Why could not we cast him out?" Jesus said unto them, "Because of your unbelief. For verily I say unto you, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, Remove hence to yonder place, and shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you." It's not a situation that they had no faith. It's just that faith grows weak. The level of faith and confidence that we are supposed to have, even as a grain of mustard seed, in asking God for help, for strength, for deliverance, even asking God for justice. Ask with confidence. Nothing wavering. Ask in knowing that He hears. And we have a way in which to gauge if He's going to hear us or not. Going back to John's epistles. If you keep His commandments. All right, am I striving to do what God wants me to do? Well, yes. Do I do that all the time? No. Do I ask for forgiveness? Yes. Then where should we stand? Confidently and assured. But just as we're seeing with Mary, Martha, and this crowd, that gets difficult from time to time. And especially where we are now, to where we don't have the signs happening around us. And that we have to take comfort and assurance and take faith in, okay, what happened here? And that creates a struggle. Any questions or thoughts on that section before moving on to verse 43?
Just thinking, going with the Mormon, going in the Mormon study, well, you just got to have faith. And they have absolutely nothing to back themselves, no evidence to back themselves. But yet they still go, well, you just got to have faith. But we see time and time again, you follow the book, you follow what God has laid out in front of you, and your life becomes better. It's like there might be bad times coming to you, as in persecution, all that, but your mindset and taking control of your emotions and having that mindset of, I'm doing this for a certain purpose, and God lays it out for you. This is how you're supposed to be. This is how the Christian life's supposed to be. This is how you're supposed to conduct your family, your household, the church, all this stuff. and then you're blessed, and then those things that happen to you, like those things are the assurance, and then you can keep continuing with your faith and keep continuing to grow and strengthen and move forward. And it's not this, well, you just don't know, and you just got to have faith, because that faith's going to run out sooner or later, because it's based off of nothing. There is no reward, and you just don't know. So that's kind of what was going through my head, is we don't have the signs, we don't have all those miracles that Jesus gave us back in the day, but we do have truth to back it, and there's things that follow after what we do.
Hebrews 11. Faith as evidence. And so, yeah, exactly what Reese was saying, that we have so many people that are out here supposedly doing things in accordance by faith, but they don't have any evidence that this is what you're supposed to be doing. And that Romans 10:17, faith cometh by hearing, hearing by the word of God. There's our evidence. And that's not just a blind leap in the dark, or just wherever my emotions are taking me at the time. There's a foundation that we're supposed to be following. Okay, anything else? 43. When he thus had spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus saith unto them, loose him, and let him go. As we mentioned, this was done for the people around him, to hear exactly what he said, and that they are able to hear clearly that he called Lazarus up. John 5, 28-29, Jesus has already discussed resurrection and judgment. And this is a showing of that. Okay, if Jesus is able to raise people now, at this point in John 11, then what about, so it goes back to that faith and evidence. What about what he's promising later? It's going to happen. The dead are going to be raised. We're going to be raised. And that's going to be it. And so because of that reality and that confidence that we have of it, what should that do to the way that we live?
That what Peter asks at the end of 2 Peter. But he asks, well, then what kind of people should we be looking for this?
Okay. It's exactly what's laid out in those epistles. This world is not our home. We're pilgrims and strangers here. This is just a stop, a holding place along the way. This is where we are now, is not the end of our this is not our destination. But then also, so as we said, you look at this raising of Lazarus and how it's depicted, and you think about Lazarus being raised from the dead and how Jesus is going to be raised from the dead in just a short while. There's all of these commands being given by Jesus. He goes to the gravesite. He goes to the cave. And he says to the people, roll the stone away. Lazarus has to be called. He's bound by his grave clothes. Others have to come along and they have to assist him. They have to let him go. But when Jesus raises, there's nobody there to roll the stone away. And there's nobody being sent to call Jesus out of the cave. And when the women come to the cave, and when the apostles come to the cave, they found the grave clothes there, and they found the napkin that was wrapped around his head neatly folded. So we have Christ receiving no earthly assistance in his raising, showing the very thing that he was presenting to Martha back in verse 40. Said I unto thee that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God. We're seeing it here with Lazarus, but we'll see it once again when Jesus raises. Behold that glory and behold that power. And that he was just able to come forth. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I don't even know if it requires a question, but why? Why does it have to be different? Why can't it be the same?
Good question. I don't know.
That's a very good question.
I would present that it's just as what we have been laid out in this text, that there are things happening in a certain way just for our benefit. And that it's being done this way just to help us to believe. Because, I mean, yeah, if you think about it, how would the situation change if there was even the tiniest bit of help that came from, let's just say, the apostles?
Well, I guess it could be blamed, you mean with his raising?
Yeah,
Okay, well then it could be blamed like, oh, it wasn't miraculous after all.
right.
But I guess, why couldn't it have been miraculous with Lazarus? But maybe it would have been too much. Maybe they just couldn't have handled it. Maybe it would have been too supernatural.
Well, and I would argue too that when we are I think that there's a bit of application to be made for us also in the fact of Jesus making them roll the stone away and then making them have to unwrap him and let him loose, just from the standpoint of a recognition of, okay, God's not going to do everything for you. That even in that situation of raising Lazarus from the dead, they still had to obey in what Jesus was having them to do. Because yeah, if he just spoke and raised Lazarus from the dead, he could have just spoke and rolled the stone away. But there's a point in that it's like, no, I'm not going to do all of this. You're going to have to do something.
And this goes back to what I said earlier, it's also to acknowledge that this is God's word.
Right. Yeah, so the full recognition of them being able to recognize this isn't just some fluke, or being able, because as we've been going through our study, we know people will try to grab at the littlest things so as to try to find an excuse. So all of this is being played out and laid out to where there's no excuse to be made. With the raising of Lazarus, yeah, Jesus did it. And when it comes to his raising, God did it. Man did not have a part in it. Because we know later the Jews are going to try to do that. Well, the apostles just came and stole his body away. If the apostles had been anywhere near that cave within those 3 days, we would be in a different situation. They were nowhere to be found. So the only other option is the glory of God. Ponder anything, Jordan?
Yeah, but I can't remember how to put it.
Should have wrote it down.
Well, no, I know what it is. It's just 'cause they're already saying, all right, fine, you can be the prophet, you can be the,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Messiah.
Huh? Yeah, the Messiah. Yes, you can be this, but you're not the Son of God. So that would go along with what you're saying. That if it would have been different, okay, yeah, it could have been another Elijah, another Moses.
Right.
But no, this is God. So I was trying to put that together, so I guess I did.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Anything else on that section? All right, verse 45. Then many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Jesus did believed on him. They could not deny the evidence. And as we've been mentioning, these signs are pointing to something. There's a purpose behind them. It's confirmation of what he had been preaching earlier about those who believe and live in him. And it was played out before their very eyes. And we get to read these things and we get to have the same confidence of what they saw. All right, just as Jesus said, I live in him, I believe in him, shall never die. Does that mean you're going to live forever physically? No, it's not what that means. It's eternally, spiritually. My life will get to go on in rest, in reward, in the inheritance. And all of this because, as Jordan said right there at the end of our discussion of that section, because he is the Son of God, just as Martha said. But as we are viewing this, and we have this positive side, just as we brought up in our discussions, when Jesus does something, there's usually two results out of the same event. You have some that believe, but then there are some that's still not going to. There's a division that's made. But some of them went their ways to the Pharisees and told them what things Jesus had done. Then gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees a council and said, What do we? For this man doth many miracles. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and nation. It is very interesting how that they are willing to acknowledge in private, okay, he's working miracles. But they would never voice this in public. What have we seen them do in public about his miracles? He's a devil. He's mad. He's not doing this by the power of God. He's doing it by the power of the devil. And we have been revealed to us, they are not saying these things out of ignorance. They're saying these things out of a hard heart. We have been shown to us, they know the truth. They just will not admit it. As we said, here is again the actions of Jesus making a division amongst the people, the same as we read in John 7:43, 9:16, 10:19. And now here, once again. And with them asking the question, what do we do? What do you mean, what do you do? You should just stop being sticks in the mud and realizing how you've been working against God and repent and stop that and follow him. So now there's several things for us to think about here, and especially in connection with what we discussed last week about not wasting time on worrying about ifs and buts. That's exactly what they're doing here. Well, if we do nothing, if we leave him alone, well, then the Romans are going to come and take away both our place and our nation. But if we do this, if we submit to him, well, then everybody's still going to follow him and stop listening to us. They're too busy trying to weigh out their options based upon what other people are going to do. And if we get into the habit of doing those things, now I'm not arguing for that we just go into things guns half cocked and all that kind of stuff. I'm not presenting that. But if we're going to get into the position to where we weigh our actions based upon what the results of other people are going to be, then we're going to be exactly where they are. And that we will not do something that we should do simply because we're worried about what other people think.
To add on to what you're saying is their attitude was wrong because all they cared about were themselves.
Okay.
They were the leaders of the Jews, and they didn't care about the nation themselves. They cared about their position. So the same thing would be said to us. If we're not focusing and keeping the kingdom first, then we will fall into that same state.
Okay, so let's jump ahead to that point in my notes.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Let's see here. Da-da-da-da. Where is it? Okay. All right, so here we're being shown how there are people inside of religion that are only thinking about themselves. And they're not thinking about others. And that's the root of the problem here. They're not thinking about the nation as a whole. They're not thinking about everybody else. It's their thoughts are being shown to us right here. If we let him alone, thus alone, all men will believe on him. Well, who are they thinking about? Themselves. They're not going to follow us. They're not going to listen to us. The Romans shall come and take away both our place. And that's ultimately where we end up when we start trying to gauge and we start trying to make decisions on, oh, well, I don't want to do this because it might make this person angry. You're not really thinking about them. You're thinking about yourself. So we should not hold back from doing what is right just to keep some people from getting angry. Jesus knew that this would make them angry. John 11:39, Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If any man walk in the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeth the light of this world. That was said after the statement, why are we going back? They're already wanting to kill you. Jesus says, I know that. But just because they are acting a certain way, I'm not going to have that stop me from doing what I know that I'm supposed to do. We do not hold back from doing something good, from doing something necessary, and doing something right that is going to help people believe. And so you just take, for example, what we did last week in going to Missoula. Most brethren would never even dream of attempting something like that. Well, we don't want to go in and disturb them. We don't want to go in there and agitate them. We don't want to go in there and make them upset. So you just let them stay in their error? And there was plenty of error to be pointed out there. That's the same type of situation as what we have going on here. Jesus going into Jerusalem. Why? Because they need help. They've lost their way. And people are suffering because of it. And that's what's going on all around us. People being misled, people being taught wrong. And if they're not suffering now, they will suffer. Well, if we go in, this might happen. If we go in, that might happen. Yeah, it might. But that's not my responsibility to worry about. And our visit to Missoula went surprisingly well because we got to talk to several different of the members there, and a deacon in particular, and he had no idea that we even existed. And had no idea that there was any kind of disruption going on in this area with the group down the street here. And then once we informed him that we were actually in the midst of talking these things out, and then the Missoula congregation inserted themselves into it and broke all of that. And that just shows one of the problems. That there's no transparency in the congregation there. There are things happening and decisions being made, and the members are being left in the dark. While you had somebody sitting on a panel talking about the good things going on at their congregation, and he says, well, one of those things is the fact that there's transparency. And then everybody in the Missoula crowd's like, yeah, sounds good, it's what you need. You don't have it. So then you have hypocrisy. And then you have Michael, how you say his last name?
Berbiglia.
Sure, whatever. Out of Stevensville.
Yeah.
And we're informing him about things that are going on here in Ronan, and I believe he has some experience with you guys. And we mentioned about the trouble going on with that congregation, and he ended up saying, well, yeah, Monty can be difficult to work with. All right, you just justified us. But there again raises the very point, the very question, or the question and point that we're trying to ask and raise here. You know that that's how this person is, and you haven't done anything about it? You're just letting him go on being a difficult person? Well, okay, he's a difficult person. If we say anything, he'll just get mad. He'll get angry. That's more reason to do something, because you can't have that going on in the congregation, especially somebody that's wanting to be in leadership. But we would have never gotten those kind of things if we hadn't tried. And that you have to set aside, okay, what will people think? How will it make me look in front of them? Not worried about that. Because even with all the good things that Jesus was trying to do and trying to help people, there were still people that had a negative view of him.
I got a couple things. First of all, the Jews thought he was going to set up an earthly kingdom.
Right.
So if that's your mindset, and he's already evaded death so many times, he's disappeared, he's done all these miracles, he's done all these things, and you're going back going, well, our position's going to be taken by Rome. If he's able to do all those things, don't you think that that would be the best asset to have on your side, to have the earthly kingdom and keep your position, or even be in a greater position? That's just it. I was just thinking about that as mind blowing that that's the route that you would take because of those negative thoughts and that negative thinking and the fear that comes through. And then so that was the first thing. But to bring this back to us, the negative thinking and how that stops us from doing anything, and the fear that it takes from us. And I like what you were just saying, that people don't go and do things because either the fear of what other people think or the fear of yourself and all these different things. This is a great encouragement to us that we need to start doing things, not letting fear take a hold of us. And whether or not you do something and it was the wrong decision, like, yeah, think it out, be prudent, all those things. But if it was the wrong decision, now you know that was the wrong decision. Now you can start instead of having this broad area to work with and like, well, I don't know, you start shrinking it down to, I know this is the direction I need to go because I've done all these things and it was either wrong or right. So now I can get on the right path and keep moving forward instead of going, well, I just don't know, so I'm going to stay here. And because that just kills your faith, that kills everything. And these people right here are working off of fear, and to where they don't want their position taken away. Guess what? It's going to be taken away whether or not you like it. So it's just, that's all I had. That's my thought.
Okay, I have 2 comments, Reese.
Bring
Bring it on. First of all, they couldn't control Jesus, and he convicted them of their sin, and they didn't like that. So he couldn't have been an asset in their favor in that sense. Secondly, what you were talking about as the application of what our mission was to go down to the state lectureship in Missoula, when you correlated it with what Jesus was constantly doing, going back because they needed someone to correct them of their sin. Because we've had, last year we had the, caring to correct and all of that. I think you made a really good application for us all to see this is our job. This is what we did last week. We cared to correct and see what was going on because these are our fellow brethren and they need correction whether or not they like it. And that's our mission. And so for us, when we're sitting there like, why are we going to Missoula and what are we going to do? And oh no, are they going to be mad at us? It's because we are caring to correct.
I want to make some... Yeah, I'll just do it. So point number 1 to what Reese was saying about, taking away their place, so on and so forth. So number 1, if you're thinking about this correctly, if you are in this position, which is a God-given position, like we're going to read about Caiaphas here in just a moment, how he's high priest. So you're in that position that's established by God, and now you have this person coming along claiming to be the Son of God, and he's submitting himself to the will of the Father. Then what should Jesus be doing, or what should be his relationship and view towards that position? If Jesus is a person who follows the law and honors the law,
Submission.
then he's going to honor your position. But you see, that's where knowing that you're not doing your position right, and you've made your position all about you, you recognize, and that's the whole situation of leadership. Good leadership does not fear other good leaders. So it's the scene from the documentary Braveheart, where William Wallace goes to the king, or the would-be king, and Robert the Bruce, and he's scared and he's worrying about all these different things, and Wallace says to him, I would follow you. There's no competition when you're dealing with good leaders. And that's what Caiaphas should have been realizing if he was a good leader. Well, no, he's not going to take me away because I'm in the position that God has put me in. And so he's only going to secure me, uplift me, put me up before the people. Of course, he's not a good leader. But then also you have within this, the Jews at this time establishing the very point that a lot of people struggle with today as to what is going to happen with the Jewish system. They see the writing on the wall. Okay, yeah, he's coming to move us out of the way. And in moving them out of the way, he's going to establish his new covenant and his new system to where, yeah, we're no longer doing things in accordance with the law of Moses. We're now doing things after the law of Christ. He's going to become the high priest. We're now all priests serving together. There's no longer this separation that's going to take place between God and his people to where you have to have all these different layers and all these different go-betweens. You just have the one. And that, I mean, it's just, yeah, so with that all playing out, and even going into the next point that we're not going to have time for today, of what Caiaphas is going to say. They are saying way more than they ever intended to say. There's more truth in what they're saying than what they would have even dreamed of admitting. Yes, he is doing miracles. He's doing it by the power of God. And we have him coming into this realm, or coming into this world, and he's going to move us out of the way. And he's going to establish himself. It's like, yeah, that's absolutely right. And yet here they are saying it, and people can't get a handle on it today. That's what he was coming to actually do. So then one final thing from this section as to what we have happening here. They go back, tell the Pharisees. The Pharisees have a council, and all of this stuff is being said. How did we get this information? Who's there to record it? John's not there.
Saul. Boom, done.
Yeah. Which, that's a good point that I've not thought to tie into that. If Saul is a Pharisee of the Pharisees, and we got a council here of Pharisees, more than likely Saul is here. But we're reading this from the pen of John. Where's John at this time?
Hanging out at a tomb.
All right, he's not in Jerusalem, he's in Bethany.
Well, it's all Jerusalem.
Right. So here we have God secretly recording an event. Here is a meeting that took place amongst the Pharisees that they never intended for anyone to know about. And God took that and brought it before everybody. God doesn't care about your right to privacy. God is, and so even with that point, when we're thinking about just the issue that brethren would have about recording secretly or even recording at all. To quote one of the elders down in Texas while we were going through the Mount Zion debacle, in saying to Gilbert that when they have meetings as an eldership, when they have meetings with the members, they record every meeting. And if memory serves me correctly, he said to Gilbert, the reason why they did that is because of us. And when I say us, it's the Robertsons. And he said the reason why we do that is because if we leave that meeting and then we end up running into somebody within the congregation and they end up saying, they end up bringing something back to us about what was said. Well, they know that from within the eldership, they didn't say anything. So that only leaves the other party that was involved to be the one to go out and tell what went on in the meeting. And then they have a safe and secure record to be able to point out to people if what was being said was accurate or not. But then this elder also added to it that we really shouldn't be concerned about having things recorded because things are being recorded all the time. God is listening. And God is taking a record. And he brought it back to the people. He brought it to John. The Pharisees had this secret meeting, and this is what they said. And especially when you're dealing with people that are behaving dishonestly, corruptly, unjustly, and then they want to sit back and cry about their rights, you don't get to do that. Your rights are forfeit because of how you're behaving. So it ends up turning into a similar situation we have going on today of rules for thee but not for me. Here are the Pharisees treating people any type of way that they want to. And can you just imagine them finding out that their secrets were brought out of the meeting? How dare you share our secrets? Give me a break. But it all comes down to making sure that we're verifying facts. And the truthfulness of events that are going on, that are being, as people are being characterized. If it wasn't for God's recording of the secret meeting, we'd never known what was going on. And even with that, I should never be concerned or worried about if anybody's recording. I should be speaking truthfully, honestly, at all times as though somebody is recording me. But it all goes back into this problem about, well, behaving certain ways because we're worried about what people will think. Well, I won't tell you what I'm really thinking or how I really feel about it, but then I'll scurry over here with this little group and this little club, and I'll tell them how I really think. It's not how we're supposed to be. But that's how they're behaving, and even with what ends up happening in 49 and 50, where they hatch the scheme, or Caiaphas makes a statement, one of them named Caiaphas being the high priest that same year said unto them, Ye know nothing at all, nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not. All right, he's saying one thing, but he has no idea about the consequences of what he's actually saying. He's only thinking about himself and not realizing that this is going to play out exactly as God intended it.
Well, it's funny because he is talking about Jesus being the sacrifice for the Jews,
Right?
and he is and was,
That's right.
but just in a better way.
Yep. Yep.
Then the whole nation gets destroyed.
That's right. Yeah, and it gets destroyed anyways. Yeah. All right, but we'll pick up there 49 and 50 next time, and we're going to spend some time in the Old Testament to make some connection and, again, just establish things that they should have known, things that they should have realized. And even with what Caiaphas is saying here, say, okay, this should have brought some Old Testament passages back to your mind as you're scheming this and planning this. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
One last thing. 1 Thessalonians 5:22. This was just what was coming to my mind with the elder that was talking about the recording. Abstain from all appearances of evil. So if you're able to record and have record of what happened, you're not being deceitful with the elders, keeping quiet from the rest of the congregation, and or twisting what some of the people, as people view the lesser people, because they're not elders, the lesser people, twisting their words to say something and being dishonest. So
Yeah.
that's another reason why is to abstain from all appearances of being evil,
Yeah.
is to keep everything honest and to be upfront with everything. So,
Everything on the up and up, everything on board, or above board, how it goes. All right, anything else? Then we will stop.